like to introduce our two presenters for this morning. Michael Miner is a nationally certified school psychologist with over 11 years in the field. He has worked in Delaware and Pennsylvania as a building and district level school psychologist. His duties have included psychoeducational evaluations, consultation with schools and local support providers, overseeing district-wide autistic and life skills support classrooms, providing behavior support across schools and for individuals, training and supervising fellow school psychologists, facilitating early intervention transition, and conducting professional development training. He is currently an educational consultant at the Patton Pittsburgh office. He is assigned to the Autism, Behavior, Response to Instruction and Intervention, School Psychology, and Secondary Transition Initiatives. Michael's very busy. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Lisa Brunchweiler. She's also an educational consultant with the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, and she's in the King of Prussia office. Her duties include facilitating and supporting school-based interagency teams to ensure that students with disabilities receive identified supports both in and outside of their school program. She provides professional development to both school and community agency staff, and she assists the Bureau of Special Education through Special Education Consult Line. Lisa also works with district and school teams in developing systematic frameworks to address behavior. Lisa's experience working with adolescents as a residential treatment facility, adults and juveniles on county probation parole, and as a project supervisor at a county correctional center have provided her with a unique perspective when problem solving around student needs. Lisa is currently assigned to the behavior paraprofessional, IDEA, and intensive interagency initiatives. She is a certified QBS safety care trainer and a Swiss school-wide information system facilitator. Please welcome Michael and Lisa.
Good morning. Thank you for attending Empowering Students with Renew. Lisa and I are very excited that you're here to join us. We also have Dr. Joanne Malloy, if she could just wave. She is our national consultant. She is out of the University of New Hampshire, and we've been working closely with her throughout this school year. The PowerPoints, you can access these on the Patton website, but what we're going to do today is we're going to give you an overview of what Renew is, what we've been doing with Renew this school year in the state of Pennsylvania, and how we set it up. Renew is a Tier 3 intervention, and it's an evidence-based practice. So within your PBIS framework, this is a very nice intervention to consider and think about implementation as we consider to roll this out next year in the state of PA. And we'll talk about it. This year we've had 7 schools. Next year we're practically going to triple in size. Then the following year it will expand even greater. Patton's mission is to support the efforts and initiatives of the Bureau of Special Ed and to build capacity at the LEA level to serve students who receive special education services. And our goal is for each child to ensure the IEP team begins with the general ed setting with the use of supplementary aids and services before considering a more restrictive environment. So once again, just a quick objectives. We're going to give an overview, talk about the state structure. This is set up a little bit differently than what you may have done in the past when you implement an intervention into a PBIS setting. We'll talk about shared lessons learned, challenges, and future paths, and what that will be is we have three of the 7 sites have generously agreed to talk about their experiences this year. What's gone well, what have been some of the successes, what have been some of the obstacles, and then what their future path is with Renew. If you go to the Renew website, which is the link down at the bottom, www.iod.unh.edu, I found this quote to best represent when I tried to explain this to practitioners in the field and people that would call and ask about Renew. You see, it's a structured school-to-career transition planning and individualized wraparound process for youth with emotional and behavioral challenges. For those of you that also work in the secondary transition at the high school level, you'll see the natural bridge when we're trying to develop youngsters as they finish high school and they get into the post-secondary employment, post-secondary training, and community living. So this is a nice bridge between the behavior world as well as the secondary transition world. I don't want to forget the acronym. RENEW is Rehabilitation for Empowerment, Natural Supports, Education, and Work. So we're covering a lot when we talk about RENEW, when we go into the individual school settings, and we develop the individualized team. To me, the strong word there is empowerment. We're empowering the students. We're providing them with the opportunity to speak for themselves, to make choices, to make decisions, and really think about what their goals and dreams are. What are the obstacles that may continually get in the way of reaching those goals, but how can we ultimately get there through setting up an action plan? RENEW started in 1996. Initially, it was a 3-year project. You see employment model with youngsters with this serious emotional disturbance. So a lot of the youngsters we've worked with in the state have had that emotional disturbance classification, but it's not entirely that population. We've also had regular ed students and students who may have specific learning disabilities, but there's a lot of research specific to the SED population and the benefits and the successful outcomes they have had working within Project RENEW. The focus is community-based and self-determined. What's really nice about this model is it's student-driven. So once you go through all the maps that we'll take a look at and you develop your individualized team, the student, along with the facilitator, will drive that process. It's not the traditional where the student comes in to the psych's office or the counselor's office and you do the back and forth interviewing and the adult gives more of the intervention. Well, let's go try and do this. The student is really going to guide this process. We utilize person-centered planning, and again, we'll talk about the 10 different maps that we utilize to really get the kids to think about different life events. Where have they been? Where are they now? What people are most important in their life? And then thinking about goals, dreams, and barriers. Within the triangle, you see that RENEW falls at the Tier 3 level. It's RENEW and Wraparound. On the right-hand side of our triangle, this comes out of the Apex High School model in New Hampshire with Dr. Malloy. Those are different interventions we would put in place within PBIS. And then on the left-hand side is the data that we use to support those interventions. So you'll recognize check-in, check-out, obviously the brief FBAs and behavior intervention plans we develop. And then the data on the left-hand side, specific to RENEW, what we use is a student progress tracker. So each of the 7 LEAs collects data on the student. They collect your general demographics, they collect unexcused absences, office discipline referrals, and credits earned. So we compile that data pre-RENEW and then look at it how they did in the first semester of RENEW and then the second semester of RENEW to see what sort of trends we're having and what impact and effect RENEW is having on the children. So that's where RENEW falls. That's why we call it a Tier 3 intervention, because it really is a very individualized process. It is time intensive, but the results that you're going to see are very beneficial for the students, for the families, and for the school at large. The goals, if you think about the secondary transition grid, those are really the 3 areas captured in the transition grid: employment, post-secondary ed, and community inclusion. And the goal is that high school completion, because oftentimes youngsters with emotional disturbances are at a higher risk for dropout rate. So we're trying to provide them with natural supports, community and sports, so that they stay engaged in the school process and that they feel empowered, that they see they set up these goals and they're able to accomplish them at short-term intervals and then ultimately attaining those larger goals. The principles, self-determination, we mentioned that towards the beginning. That's your choice-making, problem-solving, being able to think about what you want and what you need and going about and accomplishing it. If you need help with an assignment, being able to raise your hand so the teacher would come over and help you with it versus maybe engaging in some inappropriate behavior that gets you out of the text. You're able to have that coping skill to get access to what you want or need. Unconditional care, the best description for that is we're there to work with those children no matter what behavior they have shown. So if you've had a difficult day on Tuesday and you've destroyed the bathroom at the high school, when we meet on Thursday, we're still your team. The one school has the inner circle with the young man, that's the inner circle that's going to work with those children. We're not there to judge them. We are there to support you and provide you that care so that we can work on your goals and, again, work within that action plan. It's a strengths-based model. We're not focusing on deficits. We're looking at what you bring to the table and, again, empowering the children to use those strengths, whether it's in the classroom, in the community, on an athletic field, whatever it might be. Playing chess, you can take that strength and then use that to feel more success at school instead of all of the challenges and that deficit model where you look at what you can't do. We're not doing that. We're looking at what the child can do and building upon that. And then we'll talk more as we go through about building a family and community supports, really identifying who is there in your environment that's going to help you reach your goal, as well as who might be in your environment that's curtailing you from reaching that goal. Who might be holding you back that you keep going to day after day and you're hanging out with, you're enjoying yourself on the weekend. He or she may not be a positive role model. So trying to think about who are those positive role models, maybe at a job, work site, in the school setting, at your church, on your athletic teams, who can really help you within the process. This framework really captures the importance of the family. The families are engaged. We have to get family consent as long with student consent before we can begin this process. And we want the families to grow with the child as we go through the action planning. And we think about where are we now, where do we want to be, and eventually what is that long-term goal? Because mom and dad, siblings, extended family is going to have an essential role in helping that child achieve those long-term outcomes. We've talked about the school to career transition. You see the self-determination. And then the next step is the interagency collaboration. And Lisa and I will be speaking at the System of Care workshop next month in Penn State on how Renew can be a complement with the wraparound services. So this is just another intervention that can support youngsters who are at that Tier 3 level, who need these tertiary supports to make them more successful. So as you sit there and you think we may have an interest in this as a school, if you came to Lisa or myself and we started talking about, these are sort of 5 steps that we would walk you through. So if I asked anyone in this room, can you identify 2 to 3 students who you feel need tertiary level supports in your building? How many of you could do that with a raise of your hand? So a lot of you can already identify who those youngsters are at the top of the triangle that would benefit from Tier 3 supports. So what we would then ask you is, how do you respond to their behaviors or their emotional dysregulation at this point? What interventions are you putting in place? What preventative strategies are you using? The third step is to think about what would be an ideal response. So what are we doing now compared to what would be ideal? And then step 4 and 5 is, how do we get there? So sort of doing an action planning, doing a resource mapping, and stepping back and thinking about the interventions you already have in place as a district. And Joanne has a nice resource mapping activity that we run through, because a lot of times we use the same intervention over and over and we forget of some of the other resources that might be available. So when you really lay them out on the table, you can see different resources that we may not be tapping into enough to get support to help youngsters. Administrative support is key. Attending the individual student meetings, being aware of the mapping process, providing resources for staff. Release time is going to be essential because there is some time involved, especially up front with completing the maps. So we need to make sure that if Lisa's the emotional support teacher, she has the time to step away and work with Mike. And it might be once a week, it might be twice a week, but we need to make sure that we can build that into her schedule so that she's successful, and then ultimately the student will be successful. We're going to have training time and support time with the staff. Some of that occurs after school, some of that might be before school, maybe over a lunch hour, but just bringing your tertiary team together and talk about how things are going. What are some of our strengths? What are some of the areas we might be wavering on that we really need to solidify? And then obviously within PBIS, we need a personal commitment and modeling that the administrator sees Renew as a priority within the entire framework and the systemic approach of PBIS. So having an administrator on board is definitely important. We don't get an administrator to sign up front like we do with PBIS, but it's something that we might talk about as we go forward, just to make sure that we have that administrator realize the importance of this project and that we continue to implement it with fidelity across the year. So when we get to the point of trying to think about students that might be in need of Renew, how many of you use Swiss? Or you have some sort of data collection model that you capture ODRs, unexcused absences, and things of that sort. If you do that, you'll have an easier time of identifying who might be your students at that Tier 3, in need of Tier 3. We also looked at unexcused absences, class failures, grades, transcripts, and we'll do a credit gap analysis just to get a sense of how many credits do you have today versus how many credits maybe you should have by your age or grade level, and then how many credits you need towards graduation. Because sometimes you might need to fine-tune that versus the traditional way of earning credits. You might have to have administrative Ds or things of that nature to support the student, especially with the example maps that I'll show you of a 9th grader who has very few credits to date. So your data is going to draw, you're going to make database decisions, you're going to identify your student, the tertiary team will match that student up with a facilitator, your tertiary team will be in-house staff members, and you'll probably train 2 to 3 facilitators. The facilitator will meet with the student, build rapport, engage him or her in the process, give him an idea of what Renew is, what it stands for, what our goals are, and then ultimately you'll get consent from the parent and the student, and then the student will sign the roles and responsibilities form, just so he clearly understands what the purpose is of Project Renew. Once you've gotten consent, you'll go through the 10 maps, which is the person-centered planning or the futures planning. Once you're done with the maps, you'll form an individualized team. So the student will identify who he wants on the team. He might want mom, he might not want dad. Or at some point he may have mom and mom's boyfriend, and then an event occurs within the household and the boyfriend is no longer in the center of that people map or involved within the individualized team. From there, we just do our routine check-ins. We're going to celebrate your success, and we're going to problem solve. So it's not going to be you're done with the maps, you form the team, and we stop meeting. We'll continue to check in. We're going to celebrate what's going well, and we're going to look at those obstacles or barriers and try to help prevent them as we move forward. This is just another visual to give you a step-by-step. You see, you start with phase 1, the engagement and the futures planning. We're getting the consent. We're doing our maps. We're developing our team in phase 2. And then in phase 3, we're progress monitoring and evaluating the process. Again, we're implementation and monitoring what's going well and what might need to be remediated. These are the maps. The maps are, there's just a quick example. You see there are visuals and there are words. The adult can be the note taker or the drawer, or in this case, the student is the actual drawer. I'm not good at that word. We start out with a history map. Where have you been? What have you been doing? What have your grades been like? Familiar situations. Who are you today? Getting more of a current update. How are the classes going? Your teachers, your friends. Strengths and accomplishments. That's what we're talking about, that strengths-based model. Looking at the people, looking at what works and what doesn't work is almost like a mini FBA, and you can really glean a lot of information from that. We're not asking a lot of leading questions. They're more scripted questions. So something that you might know about the older brother that you want to find more information about, you don't go digging for that. You just take the process as the student unfolds and provides as much information as he or she wishes to share. And then you see the dreams, the fears, concerns, and barriers, the goals, and then eventually to the next steps, and what are we going to do at follow-up. What I like about the follow-up is you assign what is it we're doing, who's going to do it, and when is it going to be done. Because a lot of times we'll leave our meetings, such as our PBIS meetings, and we haven't assigned those roles, so that when we come back a month later and we look around the table and ask Lisa if she did her part, she just looks back. So we really want to identify who is going to do what and who's going to report back to the group by when. We use flip chart paper, and another cool thing that they're doing is there's an app on the iPad that you can actually have the student draw or write on the iPad or the adult, and then you can just print it out, and with, I guess you use the dongle, and you can print it out and email it to your team immediately. So it's not the, oh, I'll email it in a couple days, and then 3 weeks have gone by, and we haven't emailed out the map. So one of the nice things is as soon as the maps are done, the facilitator can send the maps to the entire tertiary team so that everyone's kept up to breast where we are and what we're moving towards. So this is an example of a map. I'm not sure. It's one of the actual students that we've been working with this year. 16-year-old ninth grader. He has earned 0 credits through 2 years. So he is definitely at risk for school dropout. History of drug and alcohol issues. He tends to hang with an older crowd of 22, 23, 24-year-old youngsters, or I guess grown men. DNA issues in the family. Juvenile system, being involved with, and the adults in the family have also been involved with the police. But when you look at his dreams, he wants to be wealthy, not rich. He wants to go to Jamaica. He wants to have his own tattoo parlor, drive a classic pickup. He wants to be married and hang out with his girlfriend every day. To me, the most interesting one was the school, and he wants to show up every day at school because his attendance is not very good. He oftentimes would come late to school, and through the mapping process, they found out he was late to school because he was caring for an older brother who has some drug dependency, so he would have to set an alarm, wake up the brother in the middle of the night to make sure the brother was alive and that he hadn't choked on his vomit from his heroin addiction. So that was more of an explanation as to why he was late to school versus it being more of an overt disrespect or I'm not coming to school because I don't want to be there. His fears map. To me, with the psych background, the red really popped out. You see he's got himself behind jail, trouble with the police, his anger face. His anger gets in the way of his education and his brother's health, again with the heroin, and his friends. Again, what's interesting there is he identifies the friends as being a bad crowd. So he's aware that these may not be the most positive role models for him to achieve the goals he has. And at the top he has, these are things that stopped me in the past, P.S., and they won't know more. So you really can get a lot of information just looking at these maps, how this kid feels, how this kid thinks, and then what he's reporting to adults that he really did not know up until this point. He calls the 3 facilitators that work with him his inner circle because he never thought anyone in the high school really cared about him or had taken an interest to him. His goals: get through 9th grade, have a part-time job, graduate from Forbes, get his bike running, save money, and get his girlfriend a Valentine's Day gift. So he's engaged in wanting to be in school, and if you look at some of those goals, they really build upon each other. Getting a part-time job, graduating from Forbes, getting the bike running will give him money so that he can buy gifts. He's a youngster that we tried to set up to create a modified schedule with the Career Tech Center that he goes to, getting a tattoo artist to be his mentor so that he has that bond with someone out in the community. And I don't know if they got that far yet where the mentor would then come to school and visit with the student to get him involved and then eventually have some sort of co-op work environment where he could go to the tattoo shop, earn credits, start to make some money, and really get to know what that field of work is like and learn some of those skills, being on time, being respectful to students, because the anger is something that is of concern to school. The example of destroying the bathroom was this young man because he wanted to leave early, and mom told him, no, you can't leave, so he went to the bathroom and pulled the towel dispenser off the wall. As we move through Renew, we're going to look at, again, we're doing semester marks this year, but hopefully you do it more regularly. You can look at transcripts, grades, homework completion, whatever it might be, attendance data, behavior reports, getting more of a narrative from the teachers, from mom, from the student, how things are going, how is he presenting, what does his affect and mood look like, and then of course using the maps, looking at his goals, his barriers, and his action plan, and seeing if we're making progress. So we're going to want to continue to collect data within that action plan to really see if we've gone from step 1 to step 2, and are we eventually going to make step 5? And if we're not, what do we need to do to help solidify this plan? Some of the data is really eye-opening because it shows you why it's so important to have interventions for youngsters with emotional and behavioral disturbances. You see, we've talked about the self-determination skills and helping with that transition to adulthood. These are life skills that the youngsters need to develop. So whether they haven't been taught them or they know them and they're not using them, we need to work on them so that they're using them on a more regular basis. Building a positive social support network, and again, creating that link from high school completion to real world. So the school that was working on developing that relationship with a mentor was really starting that bridge. So within his grid, they could capture that modified schedule at the Career Tech Center, as well as linking him up with a mentor, linking him up with a job site, so that he learned some of those post-high school employment skills. Youngsters in this category have the poorest transition outcome of any other subgroup within the IDE classification. Higher rates of school dropout associated with low income and underemployment. Lisa and I went to the PA Dropout Prevention Summit at the beginning of May, and the data that shows youngsters that drop out is staggering and it's alarming. The amount of income they lose across life, the percentage that end up in jail, the percentage that end up divorced, the numbers really tell the story. So this is a very important idea that we need to work on and develop. And the Project Renew really does a nice job of supporting the needs these youngsters have. They lack community and social supports. They have a higher rate of antisocial behavior, and you see their behavior problems in schools. So within our PBIS systems, they're youngsters that we're probably more familiar with because they're engaging in those externalizing behaviors. Higher rates of incarceration, 40 to 60% drop out of high school. They have poorer academic performance than youngsters with specific learning disabilities. While 53% of the population enrolls in post-secondary ed, only 10 to 25% of children with emotional and behavior disturbances do. Higher rates of mental health or school-based behavioral health utilization, poverty, and higher rates of exposure to trauma. So when we met in November for day 3, the 7 schools came back, they shared their maps, and the stories that they told, what they had learned about these students, it was sad just to hear the abuse, the murders they've seen, homelessness, drug and alcohol addiction. I mean, they were themes that were resonating in different areas across the state, the east, the west, the central, whether it was a high income, low income, rural or suburban setting. So these are pervasive problems that we're seeing in the youngsters across the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So as we begin the process, what does Renew improve? Why would you want to engage in this? It's going to improve academic achievement. Joanne talks a lot about being there. The students need to be there. So if they're there physically at school, that's step 1, versus them being out on the streets and engaging in whatever behavior they might be engaging if they're not at school. Developing those social, emotional, and behavioral competencies that are often lacking and result in the classification of emotional disturbance in the first place. Increasing their graduation rates and really focusing on those post-school outcomes. So on the flip side, while we're doing that, we're decreasing tardies, dropouts, problem behaviors, and course failures. So if you really just look at that one slide, take that back to your building, share it with your staff, share it with your school board, you really can see why Joanne has had so many schools and states that have become invested in this process, and they continue to use the project year after year. Some of the barriers, again, the inherent lack of the social, emotional, and behavioral competencies within this subclassification. They engage in higher rates of disrespect, disruption. They're not completing homework, their assignments, and then they tend to have more dropping out, absenteeism, tardies, and truancy, again, within this population. Okay? So what we've done in PA, instead of just sitting here and thinking about, okay, let's just install Project Renew, they developed a community of practice, they've taken the community of practice in secondary transition and the community of practice in school-based behavioral health and combined them, and we have a Renew State Advisory Team. So Lisa's on that, I'm on that, some other members from Patton, one of the directors from Patton is on that, and then we have individuals from different agencies across the Commonwealth that are on this Renew State Advisory Team. So while we have the educational and the practical input, we also have the input from the agency side, which is very valuable as we've started Renew this year in PA. So the advisory team, let me just bring the whole slide up. You see on one half we have the PA Department of Ed, which has a Bureau of Special Ed in Patton underneath it. We have the PA-PBS network with its around 350 members. Is that fair? Around 350 schools in the PA-PBS network. So Renew is situated within this side of our diagram. We have the PA Department of Public Welfare, where we have the System of Care Partnership and the High Fidelity Wraparound, which is what we referenced when I said that Lisa and I would be speaking at their System of Care Learning Institute next month at State College. This is just an example of some of the cross-department and agency personnel that are involved. The Bureau of Special Ed, Community Care, Behavioral Health, Department of Public Welfare and Disability Rights, Juvenile Probation, Office of Developmental Programs, Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, and the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. So there's a nice sampling of the different agencies and supports and services that are out there for youngsters at this high school level. The state advisory team, when we go to our meetings, some of us divide them to the funding team, the visibility, or the political support. But really what it does is it coordinates the training, the coaching, and the evaluation components that we utilize with the 7 sites. And especially as we're thinking about ramping this up next year, and the interest has been intense. We don't like to say that we can't take more people on. We're just not sure yet how many people we really can take on. So in year 3, we're really thinking about the rollout will be much more substantial because we're going to be training so many facilitators, Lisa and I, next year across the state. So Mike and Lisa are the trainers. What do? We provide technical assistance to the sites. We try to attend the mapping and the tertiary team meetings to see what is going on in the field, to get a better sense of the practicality of the project and what we can do to support it, what different professional development we can put in place this year, or especially as we go forward next year. We collect the student tracker data. We share that in-house, and we share that with Joanne at the university. We oversee the IU TAC and the school-based facilitators, and we consult with Joanne regularly to just get a sense of if we're on the right track, what we need to look at as far as building this up. We don't want to move too quickly, but we want to make sure, because it's such a viable intervention at a Tier 3 level, we want to involve as many teams as we can. So you see this year we've had a representative from 7 different IUs, IU3 in Pittsburgh, IU4 Lakeview around Grove City. We have IU17 Williamsport. That's a middle school. That's been very exciting to watch the progress they have made, because you don't need to wait until 9th grade to implement Renew. So if we can continue to work with the high schools and get more middle schools involved, that will be beneficial so that we can meet the kids' needs as they're in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Elanco in IU13, IU19 is Scranton, IU20 Northampton, and IU21 is Lehigh Learning and Adjustment School in the IU21. Okay? So we've had a nice sampling across the state to work with us this year. So we have 5 high schools, 1 middle school. We have an alternative school or an educational center. I learned when I went to go for the set, which is LASS. Each site is trained facilitators and has a Tier 3 tertiary team. So we've had 1 day of tertiary team training, which is what we did first, and then we had 3 days of facilitator training. 2 in September. The facilitators went back to their school. They started identifying students in need of Tier 3 support, and then starting the maps. We came back, I think it was right after Thanksgiving, for day 3, and that was when we got to hear the stories of what they've experienced as they started. And then we've done 2 statewide calls with Joanne to track the progress across the different sites, and then we have the on-site technical assistance from Patton as well as the IU. We've talked about a lot of. So the tertiary team, again, it's your school personnel. You want to make sure you have the administrator on board, the facilitator schedules and supports the training. You want to make sure the program is delivered with fidelity. We use the Renew and Integrity tool to make sure that it's being implemented with fidelity. We want to monitor outcome and really make database decisions. So that data that you're naturally collecting on unexcused absences, ODRs, credits earned, grades, things of that nature, we want to incorporate that into our Tier 3 monthly meetings. Even when you get started, you might want to have your Tier 3 meetings every other week, just as we slowly build that ball. And once you get that momentum going, you might fade it back to meeting more like once a month. So the exciting part with next year is what we're going to do with our drop-in boxes. We're going to involve, I believe, all 5 IEUs from the Central East to Philadelphia are willing to participate. So they will continue in a trainer training model. They'll continue to have their one site that they have this year, and then they'll also pick up a second LEA. The diagonal boxes, what we're going to do is get agency support. So juvenile probations through the Department of Public Welfare, we're going to pair up with the probation officers, and when the youngsters are in their juvenile site, we'll start working with them on Renew. And as they make that transition back to their home school, to their LEA, we'll support that transition, and then we'll support the homeschool LEA as that child comes back into the building. So they're able to understand what the action plan is and what the homeschool needs to do to support that. Through the Office of Developmental Programs, we'll be working specifically with youngsters with intellectual disabilities and supporting them, maintaining them in high school, and then thinking about what do they need for that post-secondary training. Again, looking specifically at that transition grid, post-secondary education, employment, independent living and community supports. What can we do to support those youngsters? Community care, behavioral health. We have a meeting coming up, I want to say next week, beginning of June, to see if we can add one of the managed care organizations to our project. And then one I don't have up there, I'm not sure what department it's at, foster care? Children and youth. Is involved children and youth, so the youngsters who are in foster care will also support them with Project Renew. And as they acclimate, whether it's to a new district or to a new school building, a new region within the state, they'll have Renew to support them. And they'll take those maps with them. When they show up at the new school, one of us, an IU-TAC, a facilitator from the homeschool, whoever it might be, will be able to walk that school through where we've been, what we're working on, and what our goals are. So this is exciting. So we're going to use a trainer training model. We're going to take our 7 sites. We're going to continue to monitor those 7 sites and roughly adding anywhere of 10 to 12 schools. There are other schools across the state that have shown an interest, and we're going to involve as many of those as we can until we get to that point where we feel like we're at capacity to really implement this well in year 2. So there you see we're going to monitor the 7 pilot sites. We're going to invite 8 to 12 more schools and train an additional 10 to 14 schools. So Lisa and I will do the training of the IU TAC, and then the IU TAC will run that with their 2 LEAs, and then in the other areas that are agency-based, Lisa and I will work closely with them next year, and then the following year they will be able to do training. It's easier that way, yeah. Stages of implementation. So while you're sitting here in this audience, you've heard about Project Renew, or you may have just picked this session to attend, you might be thinking, is this something that we can do? Do you have Tier 3 students that are in need of additional tertiary level support? If yes, you might then start thinking about the installation. What sort of resources and systems do you already have in place? Who can you go to for help? So that's where you could contact Lisa or myself to give us a sense of, if you are interested, would you be interested this year? Would you be interested in another year, seeing how year 2 goes across the state? What we're doing right now, actually this afternoon when we meet with Dr. Malloy, we'll be talking about the pilot sites and looking at the results, the data across the entire first year. And we've had some nice stability from semester 1 to semester 2. We'll get to that in just a second. But that's what we'll be doing at the end of next year. Again, we'll be looking at the progress the original 7 sites made, and then how the second year sites have done. Full implementation is probably a good number of years off, 4 to 5 years off, where it will be system-wide, and we'd be using it across Pennsylvania. And then we have innovation and sustainability, where this is just what you do. So right now, you're exploring it, you're thinking of the idea of this is something that would be beneficial within your school or your district. And then if you are, again, let us know, and we can hopefully bring you on board or let you know about year 3 and get you involved with year 3. If we look at our data, qualitatively, we haven't analyzed it completely. There is definitely an increase in the number of earned credits per semester. So when you look at the semester before Renew versus when they start, the grades are better. They're earning their credits. There's been a decrease in the office discipline referrals and a decrease in the unexcused absences. So after one semester of all of the students that enrolled, 100 started the plan. At the end of year one, 100% of the students that enrolled in Renew they started the plans. 75% of the students enrolled completed the 10 maps. 60% not only completed the maps, but then they developed their individualized team, so they selected who it is he or she wanted on that team to work with. And 30% of the students dropped out of Renew at some point. So when we got this data in January, we weren't sure what dropped out meant. None of the students had dropped out of school, as in they were not coming back anymore. Dropped out could have been they moved, a handful of them were arrested, they were put into a more restrictive alternative placement. At the end of year one, the dropout rate went up to 39%, and again, there were arrests, incarceration, more restrictive placements, families moved, and only one student had actually dropped out of high school. So we saw the trend of the data. On the left-hand side, those were substantiated again in semester 2, where we had a decrease in referrals and a decrease in the unexcused absences, and kids were present, they were there, they were getting better grades, and on their transcripts, we were seeing the result with them earning more credits. Okay? The next step I'm going to let Lisa talk about.
Okay, so we're talking about how Renew is working at different schools. What we felt, Mike did a great job with providing an overview of how we got where we are today. So we have asked some of our school sites, they were voluntold, is our new word, they volunteered to come up and talk about their experiences with Renew. So these are some of the questions that we have set up for them. So the first, I think we have from Eastern Lancaster, Garden City, correct? I always Spy. That's what I always get it mixed up. So we have John and Megan. So do you guys want to head up? And what we're going to do is have the three, if you guys have questions, just raise your hand. And we don't have another mic, but if you could, I'm sure everyone has a teacher voice that they can use without having a microphone. And then we'll just ask them to repeat it so it can be on tape. So who would like to start? So John and Megan. Hot potato, hot potato. I can hold it and stand next to you.
My name is Megan Stewart. I'm the high school emotional support teacher at Garden Spot High School.
I'm John Robbins, a secondary special education consultant for Garden Spot Middle School and High School. You want to start with students?
This year we worked with 3 students with Renew. They were all different, but we had some great success with one of our students. One of our students had come to our school homeless, then was living with a friend's family within the school district. And we had started Renew at after our meetings. And right before Christmas, he came to one of our Renew meetings and told us that he was going to be homeless again and that he had nobody to live with. So this being, I think it was our second meeting with him, we knew that we had to do something. So we got him in contact with a church agency that would find families around the school district that would take in students. So right before Christmas, we were able to link him up with a family who took him in, and he has been living with them since Christmas time and is graduating in about 5 days, pretty much. He's had his ups and downs. We've had to call emergency Renew meetings with him, whether it be for behavior inside school or even sometimes just to support the family that he was living with some of the behavior that was happening outside of school but then was coming into school. So it's been up and down, but we've actually learned a lot through his planning. The other 2 students that we had were quite different. We had one that we worked a lot with him through working out in the community. His transition was to get out and work. Didn't do so well in school behaviorally, but was phenomenal out in the workplace. So we really worked with him with that. We had a female student who we worked on getting her out of the ES classroom and into regular ed classes. She was a full-time ES student, had severe emotional disabilities, and is now full-time out in regular ed, and just got her driver's license and is looking at getting a job. So all different, but all very successful. Some of the issues that we did have with Renew, and Mike had talked about that, was just finding the time and the staffing. It can be very time consuming. Because I am a teacher, I had classes with my ES students, and it was hard to find time, whether during my prep or during other students' class time, to take out and work with them. The mapping could be time consuming depending on whether the student was motivated to work on the map. For the most part, our students were motivated because it was fun for them, but that was also an issue that we had run into. Definitely the scheduling, the time, and coverage for my classroom popped up to be an issue. Another issue that we ran into just a couple times was scheduling the meetings and getting people from the community to come in, because we have to kind of arrange around everybody's time schedule. When we wanted to have a meeting called right away, at times we had to wait a lot longer than what we wanted to. Let's see here, can you think of anything else?
I think I came to the district about 1.5 years ago and started to kind of look at our programs and see what areas of strength that we had, also identify the areas of need. And in one conversation, Megan probably won't remember this, but I said to Megan, what is one of your needs in teaching the students in your classroom? And she said, I need stuff for transition. So right away when I heard about Renew, I realized that this was a really good match and something that we needed to do, myself being a firm believer in person-centered planning. And so we did look into implementing it, and I think it has been a very helpful process, although it does have some implementation issues that can be burdensome at times. One of the things that I think hit me the most, and Joanne, there she is, in one of our last webinars, we had shared the story of Michael, which was our homeless student. And right towards the end of the webinar, Joanne said, well, just expect that you might see some regression at the end of the year. That's where we are. 2 of our students are graduating this year, and with those students, we are starting to see some of that regression. One student, Michael in particular, has said, he doesn't want to graduate. He's not ready to graduate. School is a huge social outlet for him. Our other student who's working the 2 jobs, he's ready to be working. He's done with school, so now we're starting to see some of that fall back as well with attendances, but when they're in school, they are doing what they need to be doing. Knowing ahead of time that it's going to be stressful at times, many times, trying to get things together. Michael had talked about having administrator buy-in. We have at one of our meetings, we had our assistant principal just drop in to kind of see what was going on. He wasn't sure what the meetings were about, even though that he was invited. And by the end of that first meeting, he was actually in tears listening to the story that the student had shared through his mapping activities. He pulled us aside at the end and said, I wasn't really sure what I was walking into, but you have our support now. So he's been on board, and it's definitely helpful to have that administrator buy-in, and I think that's one way you get them, is have them attend a meeting where you're learning about what these kids have come to the table with. That has been hugely beneficial. Megan had talked about some of the implementation issues that she has. I think the important thing to think about is when you are identifying who that teacher is or that person who's going to lead up these meetings, you really have to think about who has the flexibility and energy to do that. Megan is naturally skilled at doing this. She wasn't sure about it, but once she got into it, she was really able to get the students talking. She served more as the mapping person, and I was sort of on the sidelines, prompting the student with some additional questions if they were having a hard time, coming up with answers, but really identifying the person that can build that rapport with the student is huge. Anything else to add, Sophie? Okay.
Any questions for these two? And then you guys are. Okay. And we have Todd from Lehigh Learning and Adjustment School, and and Molly Flood. We don't let Todd out of the building by himself. He has to have supervision. But Lehigh Learning and Adjustment School is an alternative setting that's part of Carbon Lehigh IU. So we had, a typical high school. We have LAS's program, Washington Crossing Alternative Ed from Northampton, and then we had Curtin Middle School. So we have a variety of different settings to see, how this will work. So I'll turn this over to you guys.
Good morning. My name is Todd Breineck. I'm an emotional support interventionist in one of our classrooms, and this is Molly Flood. She's our building principal. We are an alternative school, so what that means for you as you look at the pyramid, all of our student population is essentially level or tier 3 students. So we work with the higher end of the student population to begin with. We do the tier 1 and tier 2 universal supports with the entire student body, but when we looked at what students we thought could most benefit from the tier 3 services, we really tried to focus on the 11th, 12th grade students that were most at risk for not being able to graduate. And that's kind of, we used our data that we collect and so forth to identify those students and try and figure out which ones we could probably help the most in that respect. We felt overall the process of doing Renew was very positive for our students. They were extremely receptive to it. A lot of them felt empowered to be able to be driving the meetings and to be in charge of what's going on. And some of them for the first time had some control in their own life about what things were going to go on in the direction that they were going to be able to take. So the students overall, I think, did a real nice job of opening up. They did a real nice job of talking about the different things we needed to talk about to be able to go through the mapping process. Unfortunately, however, because of the type of school we are, we're probably the data busters. We started with 2 students, and for a variety of reasons, some because of dropouts, some because of incarceration, some because of drug and alcohol inpatients or hospitalizations, or I think we even had one student who transferred schools. We ended up doing this whole process with 8 students, 2 of which are still currently involved in our process, but unfortunately the other 6 we were not able to kind of finish what we started with them, which was very unfortunate. But as far as our student experiences, we share some very similar stories probably with the other programs. We have a student right now who is currently still involved, who comes out of a very bad family situation. His biological family was causing a lot of the issues that we were seeing in the school setting. We immediately, as part of the whole process with Renew, got CASP involved with him, and were able to do some planning with him, and eventually he was able to get out of the family situation after he turned 18, and he's now in a different home environment, which has really helped to sort of stabilize him and allow us to continue to work with him in the school, where he probably would have been another one of our students who we would have lost in the process. We also have our other student who still continues to be involved in our program, who has experienced some bumps along the way, which is probably to be expected. Bit of incarceration in the middle of that whole process, but is back with us, has improved on his issues of truancy, is now in a work-based learning program where he does very well and enjoys that. And so he's gaining some experience that's going to benefit him as he moves along as we work towards getting him to graduate. The implementation that we've learned from this is, I think as you go through this, Joanne, when she trains you, lays out some pretty important steps for you to follow. And one of the ones that we tried to hold to was to get started immediately. Identify your students and get the ball rolling. With our population of students, we see a lot of truancy and transiency. Students are coming and going, they're missing large chunks of time, so the quicker we could get them involved and get the process started, the better success we started to see with those students. Like I said, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, we weren't able to finish with some of our students, but implementing it went well. The mapping went, I think, very well, and I think as we went through it, it was very much of a surprise, I think, to some of our students even, as they started to talk about their histories and started to talk about their goals and things like that, of starting to explore things that they never really thought of before, getting them to sort of think outside of the box. And for some of them who were never really encouraged to think in that manner, it was sort of an eye-opening experience to them to think, wow, I really could try to do that, and that is, it's not just a dream. I can actually have steps to make this happen, and you can work with me to do that. And so I think that was really pretty cool to see kind of the light bulb come on with some of our students, and as we worked towards implementing and proceeding through the steps. So I'm going to let Molly talk for a minute about why we decided to start the Renew process, and then I'll go into a little bit of the obstacles we face.
Hi, I'm Molly. I'm the building special ed supervisor and principal. That saying goes, if you do what you always do, you're going to get what you always got. And over the years, we've just haven't been able to focus and get all the students to graduate. And one of the goals that I really wanted to have was to reduce our dropout rate. So one of the main reasons we got into Renew is to see what other interventions we can put into place to really pull these kids along. I always refer to them as your tier 6s, because in our program, there are tier 3s. So they are a very difficult bunch, but my philosophy is there are no bad kids. They make bad choices, and this particular group makes a lot of bad choices a lot of times. So we just had to really continue to focus on the positive, moving forward. Engagement was a key. The one young man that he mentioned, we just did the data for the last set of information that we set off in his beginning, his attendance. He had like 26 days that he was out when we did the first set of data, and in this last semester he has missed 1 day, so that was the biggest accomplishment for him. So his big goal was he was the gentleman that was in work-based learning, so we got that in place for him, and that really boosted his attendance. So he was able to get 3 credits for work-based learning. His attendance improved greatly. Now, unfortunately, he did not earn any of his academic credits, but baby steps. We have him coming to school, so that's our focus next year is, you're doing great in work-based learning, and then we also have to pass your English in your math as well. And with that, I hate speaking in publicly.
As far as obstacles, I think we kind of experienced 3 major ones. Obviously, the truancy was a big part of our problem. Just in being able to continue to have meetings, we would set up a meeting on a Tuesday, for instance, and the kids wouldn't be there, so it would be a delay, and okay, now we need to reschedule everybody to get back into another meeting so we can continue moving along. And unfortunately, truancy is just sort of a part of our program, and it's something we have to continually work around. But it is also part of that barrier of truancy, and the reasons behind it are what drive it too. We have a student who we tried working with, who a big part of his truancy issue was because of his family and what responsibilities he had there. He had a mother who worked a full-time job. They needed her income, which put him in charge of the other 2 siblings in the home. So when somebody was sick and couldn't go to school, it was his responsibility to stay home and care for them. If mom needed a ride, since he was the only one with a driver's license, he was the one that had to miss school to be able to take mom to her appointments and things like that. So that became part of our obstacles of what we had to work around. I think, too, one of them was just sometimes the unrealistic expectations of some of our students, and that was, I think, frustrating in a sense, because we had one student, for instance, with multiple felony charges who wanted to open his own daycare center, and just because of the nature of his felony charges, was never going to be able to do so. But again, allowing him to be able to discover that on his own rather than just saying to him, hey, it's not going to work, let's pick something else, I think was a little bit frustrating, but again, part of the whole process, and it helped, I think, for him anyway, to not feel like, well, you're killing my dreams, you're putting me down by telling me I can't, but allowing him to discover it himself allowed him at least to feel better about that whole thing. And I think the third obstacle that we face with some of our students is the credit recovery process. Our students are very transient. Like I said, they are in and out of placements. Their families move a lot, so they're switching school districts. And often it's been difficult for the schools to track accurately the number of credits our kids have earned. So sometimes our kids are in 11th or 12th grades and they think that they're on target, and they really find out, well, no, you really only have 7 credits to your name, so you're going to need to stay in school and go longer. And that's been difficult. And sometimes it's been difficult even for the school districts to get the information they need to accurately say to the kids, hey, these are how many credits you do have, so now how can we work with you to recover those credits? So there's some things that maybe we need to look at doing differently with the school districts, whether that's working on helping kids to graduate off their IEP goals, or being creative in some other ways to get them their credits. That was obviously something that we continue to struggle with, and we need to look at different avenues to explore. But I mean, we've, I think, overall felt as a program that it's been very successful, even though we haven't maybe had some of the success with some of our students that we would have liked. I think the ones that we've been able to continue working with, even those that have dropped out, we've been able to point to and say there's been things that have changed for that student or that are different that have helped them out along the way. So that's where we're at.
Any questions, please?
Do you incorporate, or how do you incorporate this program into an IEP?
Because we're a special ed center, all of our students have IEPs, and it's just an additional layer. If the student chooses the special ed case manager to be on his team or her team, that's their choice. On some of our students, it really didn't include them at all. It included the emotional support interventionist. It included maybe a counselor, the parent, the district LEA. It really is student driven. If it was educational pieces that were in place, we could look at going to the districts with the credit recovery was a big piece, because they don't want to do IEP graduate on objectives because they really are on grade level, and you have those dynamics that you have to jockey with the LEA about. But it's really just being creative, finding ways, like we went the work-based learning route. We went to the one district has an alternative ed program, and they allowed the students in their alternative ed program to do these packets to earn a credit in a week, but they were being really resistant with allowing us to replicate that. So it's just really networking, communicating, finding out what the different districts are doing. If we found a really good idea that, say, one district was doing, we would share that with another district and say, hey, can we do this with your students too? Some districts do agree, and some districts don't. But communication, smile, collaborate. Yes.
Mike mentioned, can you hear me? Yes. Mike mentioned that having family and students' consent was important. At a specific age, your high school, do students no longer have to have that family support? And also, if they don't, or they do, how do you engage parents? How do you engage even students of this age?
All the students that we used were 16 and older. And with the mental health regs, which is a large portion of our program, it's 14 and older. So again, some of the students wanted their parents to come in to be part of the meetings, which we would always encourage, but we had 1 or 2 that the major piece of conflict was with her mother and absolutely refused, and you just needed to honor and respect that decision on her part. And we kept bringing it up every now and then, like, would you like to bring your mom in at this point? And throughout it, she was not willing to do that. But really, it's student driven, and you just have to, even though it's not what you would do, you just have to, fidelity of it and just sustainability to get the kid to continue to, you have to let them drive who are their members.
Just to add to that, thank you. Our goal was for the parent whoever the parent is, to be involved in the process. And school districts need to follow what their policy is with providing, getting parent permission, because this is considered an intervention that's being provided to a student. So we highly, we want the parents to be a part of it. And if there's that kind of dynamic, having some pre-meeting with what Renew would entail, what their role as part of Renew would be, and maybe it's not, they're at every meeting with their child, but they have a part, because the goal of the program is building these natural supports, and your family's your family. They're going to be there sometimes, whether you like it or not. They're going to be there. Hopefully, we can, they can call for some assistance or at least some kind of support. It's really interesting with Molly and Todd's program is that they do, they're following under the mental health guidelines, age of consent being 14 to give permission. So although they're inviting the parents to attend if the students are open to that, their policy for their program is 14, if the student's over 14.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
The difference between this and MSP? Yes.
I think the input that we got from this led into more of the multi-tiered systems, because that's when we did get the CAS meeting involved, and it's just another intervention that's driven from the school, but is very similar to high fidelity wraparound when you pull DPW into it. What is a benefit for the school is your team members are right there, the connections are right there, you don't have to wait for monthly, it's a lot easier to pull your team together quickly, but yet you still have the resources to reach out through mental health services, DPW, children and youth, and as we needed to, we could get them into the school environment, because the focus is getting them through school, and then if there's other issues that arise, that's when you get that other systems on board to help with family issues that may arise. But the focus of Renew itself is the main goals with high school graduation, career transition, and really focusing on the student and layering it with family needs as they come along.
And I think we're going to let Andrea talk from her perspective from her school, and then we'll talk about our leadership team, because with the different therapies, there's a lot of similarities. So any other questions for these two? Okay, great. Thank you guys very much. Okay, our next speaker is Andrea, and she is from Lakeview, School District Lakeview High School, I'm going to say, correct. And it's out in the Pittsburgh area, so she's in Mike's region. Far away from home.
Our experience at this was a little bit different because we were actually chosen as a site because of our strong transition programming. We actually had not done school-wide positive behavior support yet, which did wind up presenting us with some challenges. But we've had 0% dropout rates in my 3 years as an administrator for our special education students. So when we signed on, we were hoping to keep that. 0% is great. But we were also concerned about our regular education students because we've had some regular education students drop out. So this was nice because it's not just for special education, it's also for regular education as well. At Lakeview, we worked with 2 students, and the reason we decided to use the Renew model was because of the self-determination piece, because it was focused on getting them towards their goals for career, and really that essential community piece. We found that that was really critical for our students, and that they had a lot more success when we were able to bring in all of those supports. So that was really one of the most essential pieces for us. The first student that we chose was a young lady who was in her senior year. She was considered at risk because she had begun associating with some peers, negative behavior, some drug use. She was a student that was adopted by a family. She was a special education student, and she was expecting. She was actually going to be due in the month of February. She had talked with her teacher. She was not sure if she was going to continue with her senior year following the birth of her child. So we really brought this to the table and said, what can we do to work with the student? And Renew fit in perfectly with this. She was very receptive to it, as was her family. And we really came on at a critical time where we could put counselors with her that could talk about things like drug use during pregnancy, care for a child after it's born. But we did a lot of things as a team. We did schedule adjustments for her. she actually had enough credits to graduate so that after she returned after the birth of her child, she only came back to school half day. It was really important to her that she will be allowed to nurse her child, and her family was supportive of that. Her mom was a nurse. So this was really important to them, and we said, these are the kind of things that we can collaborate and make happen, but if we hadn't had Renew in place, that is maybe one of those things that would have, potentially slipped by, and she may not have continued just because of something like that, but we wouldn't have known if we weren't having these weekly meetings with her. So we really had a successful experience with her, and she will be graduating on June 5th. So she's also very fortunate in that her father worked at a college, and she can actually attend post-secondary education at many different sites for free. She's looking at taking a year off right now because she has a very young child at home. She wants to spend that time with the baby and wants to have things set up first, but she will be attending post-secondary education. So we're very excited for her. We're glad that we chose her, and we really could see the benefits of the program. Our second student, this was a lot more of a challenge for us. He was a student that was coming in as a junior. He's also identified as a special education student, but his mom had refused services for the previous year and a half, so he had not had any special education support and had just been evaluated and re-identified the previous school year, about in April. His credits, he had 5 1/4 credits for 2 years of school, and a large part of that is when mom said no special education. She also said no to public schools, and she decided to cyber school him. And that's okay for some students, but he was not successful at that, and he actually did not earn any credits during the time that he was cyber schooling. So we had a lot to work with. He had been arrested several times, weapons charges, drug charges. He was currently on house arrest, had a probation officer with him. And the house arrest piece worked very nicely for us because he couldn't get in trouble in the evenings. So I'm not going to complain about that. It was really great. But he really had a negative perception of school and did not think that people cared about him. His mom had that same perception. So Renew was really nice because we brought in people as a community for him and his mom, and it really changed that. He would greet us every day in the halls, the teaching staff and the administrators. He had one disciplinary referral during the first semester. And, he wound up apologizing to the principal, came in the next day just to make sure everything was okay, and we all still felt the same about him. So it was really just a different experience working with him than when he had attended our school the first time around. And we could see that with the family. Unfortunately, when house arrest ended for him, his mom let him back in with that negative peer group, which we had talked about, but he did have another criminal offense, and with all of his other charges, then he was placed in a juvenile detention center. So we'd really worked hard with him, though. In that first semester, he earned 4 credits in 1 semester. So if you compare 5 1/4 in 2 years to 4 credits in 1 semester, he was really doing well when he was in school with us. So right now, if he continues with that same positive work ethic and determination that he did while he was at Lakeview with us, where we were using Renew, I think he'll be able to successfully graduate on time, even though he's in a juvenile detention center. And hopefully, as this gets rolled out, more centers will be using this, and he can kind of continue on with those things. Obstacles that we faced. For this student, he had an accident in January, and so his attendance, they were excused absences, but his attendance really dropped for us. And even though we would set up meetings, it was really hard because he wouldn't show up, and he wouldn't let us know his doctor's appointments ahead of time. So we would have everyone at the table, we'd have subs for our teacher, and he wouldn't show up. So that is a concern. So that time built into people's schedules, so maybe that you don't have to have a sub, would be really great. So if you're kind of planning for the future, that's something that we've talked about in our district for next year is if we're going to continue to run this, that's probably something that's going to have to be built into a facilitator's schedule so that we don't have to worry about those issues if people don't show up. We actually had a little bit of difficulty getting the probation officer on board with us at the meetings, and that was very disappointing for the student, the parent, and the school as well. So I think it's great that next year they're working with that piece, because that, I think, would have really been more beneficial for that student. Data collection, because we were not a school with school-wide positive behavior support, we don't have a nice SWIFT system. So it was really me going to the guidance office and the high school principal and the secretary. I had to bother a lot of people just to collect our data. It wasn't all in one universal place where I could look at it. So that was a little challenging for us at times.
Any questions for Becky? Or anything else? Andrew? Thank you very much. Okay, so we've heard a lot of great stories from the programs, and we asked the schools to talk about what some of the obstacles were, so you don't walk into this being like, this is the best thing ever and it's just going to work out. But it takes a lot of planning. There's a lot of upfront time needed. You definitely need the administrative support. We have found, as that was just stated, is with schools that are already doing school-wide positive behavior support, I could say in my experience, it seems to fit in very nicely because you already have that systematic thinking and the data points of, all right, who's a tier 1, who needs tier 1 level support, what's going to be the data for them to go to tier 2 level support, what would be the data for them to go to tier 3 level support. So that's one thing that we have learned as a state with the pilot sites. Again, also the timing. Having the administrative support to be able to give the staff the time to meet with the students. And the students need to be in school because you schedule a meeting. And I don't know how many times Mike and I were going to go to a school and they're like, well, that student didn't show up today. So we're like, okay, my day just changed. So having that flexibility. And as we are expanding the program throughout the state, we really want to have a network of all the Renew facilitators, which is what we've done so far, is having some conference calls where they can speak to each other about what the barriers that they're feeling and what kind of good ideas came up, or what did work, what didn't work, and have them share with each other. When we talked about having the advisory team, we have members from Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, Children and Youth, the Foster Care Program, Juvenile Probation, the Juvenile Court Judges Commission. So having all those different, and the Youth and Family Institute, who's implementing high fidelity wraparound in several counties. We have Kelly Prowse, who's here today, with, she's drinking water, sorry. CCBH, Behavioral Health. We're going to be bringing on Value Behavioral Health for the people out in the West. But having those different people, those agencies and stakeholders as a part of the panel has really been beneficial, because this fits into so many things that you're already doing. I know we've talked about family group decision making, and that's, it's similar with the person-centered planning. You have the student who's driving the train, just like the in-family group decision. You have the family who's driving the train with where their plan's going to go. As far as the IEP question, some kids, some students might not have IEPs, some do. This is outside of the IEP process. There might be aspects of the Renew plan that would affect maybe some changes in the IEP, like what Molly had said about academics or maybe job training, but this is a separate focus. So I think that answers those questions. So if you're interested in Renew, these are some of the questions you want to think, like what do you already have in place as a Tier 3 intervention? Some people are in counties where there's high fidelity wraparound. So we don't want to take the place of those services because they're similar processes. But if you don't have high fidelity wraparound, or if you have students who aren't MA eligible, who don't qualify for high fidelity wraparound, maybe Renew would be an option for you. You want to look at your dropout rates, your course failure rates. We all know that the prisons are filled with people who did not finish school. Having worked in the prison, I was surprised how many, I was shocked about like over 90% of the people in jail had dropped out of school by 8th grade. And I didn't even think about it until I was there. So just what are your dropout rates? What are people's futures going to look like if they don't stay in school? And for this, if you're interested, you can contact Mike or I, We have Kristen Starosas at IU 20, if you're in that area. We have Donna Halpins in IU 21. Ellen Cummings, IU 19. Kelly Swartwood is IU 17. Kristen Lentz, right, IU 13. And then Mike is heading up for the Western region, more so.